begin. My name is Gavin Yamey. I'm a professor of global health and public policy here at Duke University, where I direct a center called the Center for Policy Impact in Global Health. And with me today, you're going to hear four short talks from four speakers. You'll hear from Marco Schafferhoff, who is the co-founder and managing director of Open Consultants and a long-standing partner of our center. Then from Asondu Obuoji, our center director, center deputy director and research lead. He's also an assistant research professor in the Duke Global Health Institute. We also have Shingai Machingaidze, who is the co-chair of the 100 Days Mission Science and Technology Expert Group and a member of the International Pandemic Preparedness Secretariat. And last but not least, you'll hear from Mimi Darko, Chief Executive of Ghana's FDA. We are really delighted to be launching today two interlinked reports that we've worked on over the last 9 months. The first, led by Marco, is on reforming the R&D ecosystem for neglected diseases, emerging infectious diseases, and maternal health. And the second, led by Asondu, examines how these reforms, how these shifts and efficiencies in the R&D ecosystem could affect product development. So over the next half an hour, I am going to briefly set the scene. Marco will share key messages from that first report on potential shifts and efficiency gains in the R&D ecosystem. Then Asondu will present the key messages from that second report, the impact of these efficiency gains on product launches. And then we'll hear reflections from Shingai and from Delise. We're going to leave about 30 minutes for a Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. As you hear us say interesting things, as they arise in your mind, put them in the Q&A box. No need to wait until the end. Some of those questions we might be able to answer in real time through text. Others clearly will be better in the panel discussion towards the end. This is being recorded. We will post the video on our website and we will make the slides available. So let me briefly set the scene. Clearly, the last 20 years have been good for global health and good for product launches, but there are still lots of gaps. We need new health technologies to not just maintain the gains, but to accelerate global health progress over the next 20 years. So our question ultimately in this work was, how can we save the most lives and reduce the largest burden from infectious diseases and maternal health conditions? And do so in a constrained funding environment where the costs of trials are rising. We know there's one phase 3 TB trial, for example, that cost $500 million. There's a need clearly to make our investments more strategic and to overcome some of the bottlenecks that are getting in the way, bottlenecks in the R&D ecosystem, and exploit some of the efficiencies that can arise from new technologies, new approaches, new platforms. We are aware, of course, to quote Margaret Crook at Harvard, that tools don't deliver themselves. Clearly, we have to overcome challenges in access, deployment, and delivery, though that was not the focus of this work. Two contextual points. First is that this work is happening in part to feed into the third report of the Lancet Commission on Investing in Health. Asondu, Marco, and I are commissioners. That third report is called Global Health 2050. It will launch at the World Health Summit in Berlin in October. And in that report, we lay out pathways that all countries could take to achieve what we call 50 by 50, a 50% reduction in early death before the age 70 by 2050, with an interim 2035 target. And there's a lot of synergies between CIH 3.0 and this work. And we're going to need not just today's tools, but tomorrow's tools to reach these 2035 and 2050 targets, we're also clearly going to need pandemic medical countermeasures. The second contextual point I would note is that this work has been done on the background of previous research that we've done, developing a portfolio modeling tool with TDR and examining the benefits of pooled funding mechanisms, the health and economic impacts of products that might arise from pooled mechanisms. So our objectives over the last 9 months were to identify around 20 or so game-changing tools, the ones that could have the biggest impact, assess the potential for R&D efficiencies to help accelerate tool development, and model the impact of those efficiencies for these 3 areas that I mentioned earlier. Marco is going to share the results of our work on the R&D ecosystem in 6 particular domains: AI, trials, manufacturing, regulation, new technologies, monoclonals, and mRNA in particular, and governance and finance. And then Sonda is going to present the work taking these efficiencies and seeing what impact they would have on the R&D pipeline, the costs, the funding gaps, the product launches, and the estimated public health and economic impacts. We have tried to assess these changes and impacts through both quantitative and qualitative work, looking at the public health and economic impact. We've done over 120 interviews. We had 3 regional consultations in the Asia Pacific, led by Ming Xu at Peking University, Sub-Saharan African region, led by Mosa Moshebela at KwaZulu-Natal University, and Ernesto Ortiz, Latin America, from Duke. Without further ado, I'm going to pass now to Marco to present the key messages arising from this first report on the R&D ecosystem. Marco, over to you.
Thank you very much. I will focus on key efficiencies, and I will give you a snapshot of the areas that Gavin just described. So I will start with AI, with a focus on discovery, and there are 3 points. So point number 1, drug discovery is a long and usually very expensive process. What we find in our paper is that AI can substantially accelerate discovery timelines and reduce the cost. So for example, if you would take a more traditional approach, reverse vaccinology studies, these may take several years and they may cost up to $10 million US. In our paper, we, for example, highlight work done by the biotech company Evaxion, work on gonorrhea vaccine. The AI tool of Evaxion, which is called Eden, has identified multiple promising antigen candidates for the vaccine. The entire discovery costs were about 200,000 euros, so really a fraction of more traditional screening approaches such as reverse vaccinology studies. So point 2, and maybe even more important, the screening of the AI tools is often much more comprehensive compared to previous approaches. So essentially AI really outperforms humans when it comes to the screening. So there is really a new opportunity to search across vast and unknown chemical spaces for novel compounds. So there is really the potential for innovation. Point 3, the screening will also or potentially lead to a stronger pipeline and higher probabilities of success in the clinical phase, because the candidates from the discovery and preclinical phase are stronger. So second, clinical trials. Again, we identified multiple areas for efficiencies. One limitation though, many data points, so in fact most of the evidence on clinical trial efficiencies is from high income setting and chronic diseases. So there's a question to what extent we can translate these findings to neglected diseases, EADs, maternal and women's health. Anyhow, so studies indicate that decentralized clinical trials using digital tools, for example, can reduce physical visits by up to 40%. Physical visits are a main cost driver, or one of the main cost drivers of clinical trials. Further cost savings can be secured through synthetic control arms. So, for example, one study indicates that we can save 10 to 20 million per trial, or even more, depending on the size of the synthetic control arm. Trial networks can also lower costs, for example, by sharing data, patients, almost by a quarter. But furthermore, as we know that during pandemics, we really need strong clinical trial networks and clinical trial sites in LMICs. So we really need these from a PPR perspective as well. Finally, when it comes to clinical trials, there is one AI tool that can predict the probability of moving to phase 3 with a 79% accuracy. So again, here there is a lot of potential to identify trials that may fail, stop these trials and save costs. Now coming to manufacturing. Here we highlight two things in our study. Number one is optimized mRNA production processes. Our study includes a panel of the manufacturing approach of Quantum Biosciences. And it indicates, so cost models ran by Quantum and indicates essentially that for 100 million doses of vaccines, we can save about 60% of the costs of conventional mRNA manufacturing. So this is about 70 million in savings per 100 million vaccine doses. That's very significant, of course. And Quantum's approach may allow to produce mRNA vaccines for about 50 cents per dose. The second point that we highlight in the manufacturing section is that modular facilities, which also exist for non-mRNA vaccines, for example, can also lead to substantial savings in terms of capital costs. So, for example, a modular facility for seasonal influenza was established in Western Africa at a cost of 20 million. This is really low compared to the costs of, let's say, conventional manufacturing sites, which can easily above 200 million or more. When it comes to regulation, we highlight harmonization and reliance mechanisms. So one key example is the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, which helped to reduce approval timelines in Africa from up to 7 years to 1 or 2 years. We also discuss some of the innovations that were introduced during the pandemic. So, for example, review times in the European Union were reduced from 40 to 70 days to 20 days. So there's also a lot of potential in that regard. Finally, when it comes to financing and governance, the introduction of a priority review voucher in Europe, for example, could provide an additional incentive to industry to invest in neglected disease R&D of 100 to 200 million per candidate. And then we also highlight the need for stronger regions, for example, regional priority setting and regional hubs. So then very briefly, coming to our selected action items. Again, this is just a selection. So for AI, we suggest the scale up of AI for product development for NDs, EADs, and maternal health. Of course, AI is not a panacea. We know that a lot needs to happen to leverage the potential of AI. And it's also very important that we enable LMICs to take part in AI by building capacity. Otherwise, we risk that we will augment existing inequalities. We also suggest to support the creation of a vaccine library to strengthen pandemic preparedness and response. So CEPI is working on that. So this is essentially mapping antigen designs of priority viruses which then could be taken off the shelf in an emergency situation. So that's really an important aspect of CEPI's 100 days mission. On clinical trials, we suggest to leverage the efficiencies from innovative clinical trial designs to really use them in low-income settings, and also to unlock the potential of the clinical trial networks. For manufacturing, we suggest to scale up innovative manufacturing approaches, such as the approach of quantum biosciences. But at the same time, we also need to ensure that we create diversified production capacity across region and product types. So also diagnostics, also therapeutics, and also non-mRNA vaccines. This is a critical point. And to make that work, we need concrete and firm purchasing commitments. Gavi has made such a commitment. PEPFAR has made such a commitment. We need more of that. Regulation, we need to invest in sub-regional regulatory harmonization, reliance models. We make multiple other suggestions on digitalization, for example, in that regard. But then there's also the need to strengthen NRAs, including through collaborations between LMICs and LMICs, but also between high-income country and LMICs, for example, twinning partnerships. Very briefly on new and underused technologies, we need to leverage the advantages of the mRNA platform, speed, versatility, to mention two. But then there is also the need to scale up investments on monoclonal antibodies that target infectious diseases, in particular neglected diseases and EIDs. This is very important because right now the focus of monoclonals is very much on chronic diseases, and access to monoclonals is very, very low in LMICs. Financing and governance, final point, then I pass on to Osondu. So the introduction of a priority review voucher in Europe, investments in the underlying R&D system rather than in individual trials only. That's a very important point. And then stronger regional R&D ecosystems, including for R&D priority setting. Over to you.
Thanks, Marco. So here's what we did to analyze, to estimate the health and economic benefits, and also to compare the efficiency gains from each of the scenarios. We adopted the product portfolio as a unit of analysis, and we included all the. We started with the policy cures database with GFinder, and we included vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, excluded vector control products, devices, and nutritional supplements. That left us with about 1,498 product candidates, which we grouped into 153 product portfolios. These product portfolios were 38 vaccine portfolios for neglected diseases, 38 vaccine portfolios for emerging infectious diseases. We also had 38 vaccine portfolios for neglected diseases, 38 therapeutics portfolios for neglected diseases, and also 38 diagnostic portfolios for neglected diseases. We also had neglected 50 emerging infectious disease portfolios. We had vaccine portfolios, therapeutic portfolios, and diagnostics. And then for maternal health, we only had therapeutics and diagnostics portfolios. The time horizon for analysis was 2023 to 2044, and we looked at 4 efficiency gain scenarios. We adopted 2 perspectives for this analysis, a health systems perspective and a societal perspective. For the health systems perspective, we looked at the cost of research and development all the way to the delivery of the product to the individual. We measured health gains as deaths and DALYs averted, and we measured the efficiencies as incremental costs per death averted and incremental cost per DALY averted. For the societal perspective, we measured the same cost and the benefits, but in addition, we also looked at the productivity benefits from the health the monetary value of the health benefits that were that accrued to society. And we specifically for the net monetary benefits, the way we measured this was by multiplying the DALYs averted by the GDP threshold, which we chose as the 4,400, based on the difference between low and middle income countries. And then we subtracted the incremental cost that we will get from society. So this is a summary of what we did, and I'll just run through a couple of results, and you can find some details in the report. So these are the 4 efficiency gain scenarios that we looked at. You'll see the first one is the reference case where we assume that nothing changes, the pipeline stays the same, and all products progress as normal. The second is the coordinated investments scenario where we assume that we will have coordinated targeted investments to ensure that each of the 153 product portfolios leads to an actual vaccine, an actual product launch. We've done previous work that showed the on pooled procurement, pooled funding for clinical trials. So that's one type of coordinated targeted investments that we're talking about. The third is where we look at the effects of artificial intelligence and adoption of smarter clinical trial approaches. Here we assume that these will lead to about 60% reduction in preclinical research costs, about 25% reduction in clinical trial costs, a 10 percentage point increase in success rates. And the last one is where we look at the efficiency gains that might come from regulatory improvements, such as shortening the market entry, the time to market entry, and also reduction in manufacturing costs. So in the first scenario, in the reference case, if we assume that there is no replenishment for missing products, we expect to see about 453 product launches over the period that we analyzed. And these 453 product launches will be within 59 product portfolios. It means that there will be more than 90 product portfolios where there is no launch at all. To the right of your screen, you'll see a breakdown of the 453 products that we expect to see. And you'll see that overwhelmingly, most of them are diagnostics. And we have very few vaccines, with therapeutics occupying the middle ground. Next slide, please. Now, if we decide that we want to adopt the coordinated investment scenario where we ensure that there is at least one launch in each category, there is going to be a funding gap. And to estimate the funding gap, we did 2 things. The first was we have assumed that there will be a replenishment of the current pipeline with simple products. And if we did that, the annual funding gap will be about $1.4 billion. The second was to look at a worst case scenario where we replenish the current pipeline with complex candidate products. Complex candidate products are more expensive for trials. They take longer, the trial durations are longer, and the probabilities of success are lower. So you can see that they would indeed cost more. And if we assume a replenishment with complex products, then the annual funding need jumps to about 10 billion, 10.8 billion, and then the funding gap will be about 6.97 billion. So we can see that a best case, worst case scenario, we should be looking at about $1.4 billion to $7 billion needed annually for to ensure that there is at least one launch per product. Next. So for the efficiency gains, we measured this. The previous slides, please. So we measured efficiency gains using many multiple indicators. I'll present 2 of them here. On this slide, you'll see the number of portfolios for each of the categories that translate into positive net monetary benefit to society. And I'll pause here to explain a little bit more about what the net monetary benefits means. the net monetary benefit is positive if society gains more in economic terms than what it invests in getting the trial. So for example, if the returns to work, productivity, outweigh the investment in the trial, investment in the treatment, then that's a positive. It's negative if society invests a lot of money but does not reap the benefits. Now, when it is negative, the two things that we notice from the analysis is that either the disease burden is not big enough to recoup the investment from research and development, or the cost of treating of the disease, it's not the disability from the disease is not a lot. So here, what we have done is to compare all four scenarios and try to look at the difference between each scenario and the reference case. And I'll draw your attention to just above the top red line. So you'll see those are the neglected disease portfolios. And you'll see that for all of them, there is a significant change compared to the reference case in the number of product portfolios that yield positive net monetary benefits. However, when you look at the middle, where you see the EID portfolios, you'll see that the picture is not as rosy. So apart from, first of all, for the EID diagnostics, there's no change at all for all the efficiency gains. And that's really driven by, again, the burden of the disease. And the EID vaccines, you'll see just one small changes, and then, of course, therapeutics is all essentially the same. Interestingly, for the maternal health categories, they actually yield positive. All six portfolios yield positive net monetary benefits for all for all efficiency gain scenarios. Next, please. The second one I'd like to present here is the cost savings that potentially arise from introducing AI clinical trials and all. So Marco has presented the different cost savings that could potentially arise from introducing them individually. But when we combine them together, the cost savings that we see will translate to about up to a 40% reduction in average cost per launch. And you look to the left of your screen, you'll see that these are the different average cost per launch for each of the categories. And you'll see that the average cost per launch will be up to, the reductions will be up to 8 million for diagnostics, up to about 52 million for therapeutics, and up to about 122 million for vaccines. And this is important because we initially talked about a funding gap. If we're more efficient in the use of the resources that we have, then we will need less resources. That will essentially reduce the expected funding gap. Next slide, please. And this is the final slide. And here, this is just a global ranking of the priority products. And basically, what we did here was to look at we ranked all the priority products by three metrics: the incremental cost effectiveness ratio per death averted, and then per DALI averted, and also the net monetary benefit society. This list here is a subset of the entire list, but this list is important because it only looks at the product portfolios that yield a positive net monetary benefits and also cost savings to the health systems. And there are 15 ND portfolios, neglected disease portfolios in this category, and one EID portfolio. So you'll see strep pneumonia all the way to Zika. And the net monetary benefits we expect from this are about 0.25 to about 48.7 billion. The regional rankings differ, and you'll see that in the report. And those are also driven by GDP per capita and also by the local disease prevalence. One important note here is that, for example, these vaccines assume a 0% baseline. And also, for example, Zika here assumes the global prevalence estimates in 2019. There's been significant reductions in that, and when we run the numbers, assuming those reductions, it yields a negative net monetary benefit. So there's an asterisk there. But there are no global estimates today as we speak on where Zika stands, so it still stays on this list. But in the report, you'll see a longer list and a little bit more content to provide some context to these rankings. I'll end with this point that in doing all this, the people we talked to let us know and reminded us that economics is just one out of many factors or criteria that they use to rank. Other factors that stakeholders consider very important include equity, national security, political feasibility, and all. So this is just one data point and one input into the decision-making process, and the results should be interpreted as such. Back to you, Gavin.
Thanks so much, Marco, and thanks, Asondu. And yes, just to amplify Asondu's last point, this came out particularly in the regional consultations. Asondu led modeling where you can rank needed products based purely on their economic benefits to society. But in the regional consultations, we heard about the importance of developing products for conditions that are highly stigmatized, for example, where there's a huge equity case for doing so. So Asondu's point is really an important one. Economic ranking is only one way of ranking what is needed. Just a reminder, please continue to put your questions in the Q&A. We've got 3 already from Lei Chu, Ishambra, and Emily Alirol on AI. Zoe had a question on the slides. Yes, we will make the slides available on our website along with the reports. And we've got the URL and QR codes coming in the final slide. Next, we're going to hear from 2 people who we have worked with over the years, 2 of the finest leaders in this domain. Shingai Machingaise is going to give 5 minutes reflection really through an African regional lens. She is co-chair of the 100 Days Mission Science and Technology Expert Group and serves on the Secretariat for the International Pandemic Preparedness. Then we're going to hear from Mimi Darko, Chief Executive of the Food and Drugs Authority of Ghana. So Shingai, over to you.
Thanks so much, Gavin, and greetings to everyone who's joined the call. And thank you for taking the time to engage a little bit further with the exciting findings from this report. So I'll start off by saying thanks to Gavin, to Marco, and Asondu for leading this work. I think it's taken an enormous amount of work and collaborative and a collaborative approach to produce this report. So a few comments from me. I'll start by saying that when we talk about research and development, we often say end-to-end R&D, but I think we need to spend a little bit more time thinking about what does that mean. And I think when you look at these 2 reports, you are actually looking at the full spectrum from discovery all the way through to clinical trials, through to manufacturing, through to governance, which is fantastic. And I think that's really the approach that we need to take. I think the investments that we require over the next 20 years must be intentional and they must be sustainable. I think those are the 2 key things that I would like to emphasize. If we look at R&D in general, over the past decades, there have been significant amounts of investments that have been made in the African region that have built research and development capacities. And this has progressed to varying degrees across the continent. But what you do notice is that there is concentrations or pockets of excellence, which is not bad. But you do see that in other parts of Africa, in other regions, the capacities have not, been developed as much. And I think that's something that also needs some attention. I think overall, we've generally focused on the more downstream investments that have been clinical trials, so phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials, a lot of capacity to do big, large trials, but less has been focused on the upstream, and that is the discovery research, the animal research. And I think this is really where the intentional and sustainable investments are required. How do we, while expanding the downstream, very important. I think we've touched on what is needed for clinical trials, for manufacturing. That must happen. But at the same time, how do we introduce these sustainable and intentional investments that can build the research and development capacity, the early research, so that that can feed into the pipeline? We currently don't have discovery research originating from Africa feeding into the product pipeline. And I think that really, if we're thinking about long-term sustainability, that is where we need to get. We need to be discovering, we need to be doing our own animal testing, we need to get to doing first in human clinical trials and not just receiving products that have been researched and most often with phase 1 first in human trials done in the global north. So I think that's really where we need to go. And I think before I end off, I'll point out a few other things. Within the clinical trials, I've mentioned that there was a greater focus on phase 2 and 3. I think it's also important to talk about genetic diversity and to think about how we can expand our R&D ecosystem in a more inclusive way that allows us to include participants that are more representative, particularly within the African region that is very diverse. I'm mindful of time. I think with regulatory aspects, Mimi will speak to this. So I won't say much, but there have been significant gains that have been made in building regulatory capacity within the African continent. And I think the positive effects of that are already showing. And of course, there's still more that can be done. And so if you were to say to me, what are key takeaways from these two reports that I would like to highlight, I would say that, first of all, what we need is support for R&D African health priorities. So I think at the moment, a lot of the times the priorities are not necessarily set from the global south perspective and often set by different agencies. So it might be the funders, it might be industry, etc. So the African health priorities are important. The second would be, I think we can improve on the coordinated R&D collaboration at a continental level. So this is looking at the whole of Africa. And I think the Africa Union agencies have a very key role to play with this. That's the Africa Centers for Disease Control, the AUDA NEPAD, the Africa Union Development Agency, the African Medicines Agency, and the African Continental Free Trade Area. So I think these are key agencies, of course, to help us coordinate better. We need increased investments from our African governments on R&D and health, because that is very minimal at the moment. And lastly, I think as funders digest the findings of this report, we need them to keep in mind that, as they plan the future investments, we need them to invest with intentionality and sustainability in mind. Because without that, it's very difficult to build lasting capacity. A lot of R&D is through research grants, and you can imagine trying to build a meaningful product pipeline with 2 to 3 year research grants. It just doesn't work. So I think those are my key reflections, Gavin, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much for including me.
Thanks so much, Shingai. And after we hear from Mimi, I'm going to pose the first question to you. It's from Peter Kilmarks, who's the acting director of Fogarty. It's about African regional manufacturing. So I'll come back to you in a few moments, Shingai. Mimi, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Loud and clear.
Excellent, excellent. I'll just first of all like to say thank you for the opportunity to speak and for the findings that in this, what I would call a really comprehensive, eye-opening report. I think Gavin, Marco, and Osondo, you've done a great job. Now, from the point of a drug regulator, looking at the landscape, the dynamic landscape of drug regulation, I remember when I first started working, one of the first phrases that I heard was that regulation is dynamic. And over the past years, I've actually seen that it is actually true. Particularly if you focus on some of the innovations and lessons that we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, within the context of what the R&D ecosystem is going to look like over the next 2 years. The pandemic was what I would call a profound, it has been a profound catalyst for change for regulators, for drug research, and it has highlighted where we have our strengths and where we need to improve to ensure that we have, we develop global regulatory systems and not sit in, everybody sit in their own corner. And one of the most significant learnings, and we learned that from Ebola, and it was even more profound in COVID, was that it is important, it is critical that regulators become more flexible and become more agile in their regulatory pathways and the way they take decisions. There is the need for rapid development, approval, and distribution of vaccines everywhere in the world. And we saw in COVID where, vaccines were available in certain parts of the world and in other parts they were not. And we have built up with each pandemic, we have become better at what we do. In developing countries, especially where regulators are faced with unique challenges, resources, capacity, we have also made remarkable strides. And the pandemic has even further underscored the need for collaboration and harmonization. We were doing that before, but at a minimum, level. But after the pandemic, we've realized that regulators have to harmonize our standards. So as Shingai was talking about, we have all looking forward in Africa to the Africa Medicines Agency, which is more or less operational. We have a governing board chairperson, and we're looking to have the DG. And it is all the main aim of the AMA is to demonstrate the power of collective action, to help streamline processes and ensure timely availability of medicines across all countries and across all borders. I mean, even before the AMA, we have harmonization efforts like the regional economic blocks like ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, all working within the AMRA in Africa, trying to harmonize requirements to ensure that clinical trials and even medicines are available quicker. We also have the one that I like talking about the most is the Africa Vaccines Regulatory Forum. That is a forum that brings together regulators, researchers, and ethics committees, and allows for has ensured harmonization of clinical trial requirements to help expedite the development of vaccines so that, as Shingai was saying, Africa is not the last person to do trials, but because we have AVRF, that joint review process is also a capacity building forum that has allowed us to do certain types of trials that we would never have thought we could do. We're looking at trials in human trials are now being done in Africa. I remember I advocated for the first one to be done in Ghana. So the fact that we are collaborating and building capacity together has made us more confident and has allowed us to be quicker to make processes available during pandemics. So for example, the COVID-19 vaccines were all evaluated, most of them were evaluated using the AVRF joint review process. The newest one of these is also the AU Smart Safety Surveillance Initiative, funded by the Gates Foundation, which is going to work as the safety arm of the AMA. And that allows all of us to put all our safety data into one database and to be able to generate signals faster. In this era where trials are quick, and products are coming out of the pipeline quicker. The most important thing for us regulators is safety. And it is good to be able to know that you can have all your safety data from different countries. And I think we have about 12 or 14 members now, and we hope to get the whole of Africa on board and be able to look into the same database and to be able to see any signals that are generated that are peculiar to us and may not have been seen in other parts of the world. But generally, I believe that these have all played pivotal roles in facilitating information sharing, aligning our regulatory requirements, and promoting reliance. And at the end of the day, it has helped to accelerate approval processes. So it boils down to there are going to be, in fact, there are innovations in regulatory science as well. We are now using digital technologies. We are having clinical trials that are remote. We have adaptive trial designs, and all these have been instrumental in our response to COVID. They've enabled us to make decisions quicker, to make decisions more confidently, and for regulators in developing countries, leveraging on these innovations will help, I think, bridge the gap and improve our efficiency and effectiveness. I would say they come with some challenges. We have to look and make sure that there's integrity of and security of digital health data. In most of our countries, that is where integrity of data is an issue. And in doing so, we need to be able to maintain public trust, because for us regulators, the most important thing is ensuring public health and safety. And the public needs to be able to trust us. But as our role as regulators, we have to balance innovation with rigorous oversight, and to ensure that all populations, especially with all these new technologies, will benefit equitably from the scientific processes that we have to make sure that we do. Next 20 years, I think it's an incredible opportunity to transform the R&D ecosystem. Regulators are well on board to ensure that we do our best by harmonization. We are committed to harmonization. We are committed to collaboration, global collaboration, reliance, and this will only improve and ensure that we can make life-saving technologies and therapies reach our patients faster and to be able to save more lives. In conclusion, I think this is an excellent report. I looked at it, and the more I read the report, the more I said to myself, it is all about collaboration, harmonization, and embracing innovation. We have to embrace it. It's coming whether we like it or not. But I think by working together as regulators, we can improve the R&D ecosystem, make it more robust, and make it more responsive to ensure that we can deal with the health challenges of tomorrow, and we can deal with it in a fast and time-saving manner to ensure that we make these products available. So all in all, I think it's an excellent report, and thank you for having me make these comments. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mimi and Shingai. Sustainability, intentionality, capacity, and innovation. It's very annoying when folks who posed questions very early on don't get those questions answered first. But I'm going to take the prerogative of being the moderator here, because we've just had a couple of questions very specifically to Shingai and Mimi. So I'm going to take those first. But I promise the folks who asked questions at the beginning about AI, I will make sure we get to them before 11. Shingai, I said I would get back to you with the question from Peter Kilmark's Fogarty director on regional vaccine manufacturing, including in Africa. He says it seems very appealing in times of global shortages, but the rest of the time it's going to be less expensive to continue importing from India and other global vaccine manufacturers. He says, my impression is that despite initial enthusiasm and support, some of the African vaccine research manufacturing sites are already faltering. Can you provide a bit more information on how to sustain the higher costs for regional manufacturing during inter-epidemic periods? And just one point I'd make is that we do in the report talk about the need to pay a higher premium at first, as Gavi is doing and as PEPFAR is doing. Over to you, Shingai.
Thanks, Gavin, but I think you just answered the question. So I think the point is well made. There is, of course, increased interest, particularly in vaccine manufacturing, but I do think that there have also been some gains with diagnostics and therapeutics as well. But specifically with vaccine manufacturing, the interest from African governments is of course welcome, but we also have to acknowledge that not every country can manufacture vaccines. It then is not going to be economical or sustainable, which is the points that have been raised by Peter Kilmarx. So I think the main thing that makes the cost of vaccines cheaper from India is the scale, the volume of the vaccines that are coming. And I think, Gavin, you've also just alluded to that. The manufacturers have guaranteed high volumes of vaccines through programs such as Gavi. And so this is what allows the cost of those vaccine doses to go down. And so it then boils down to the need for the regional coordination, where there can be alignment of who is going to produce what, when they produce it, who is going to buy it, and when they buy it, they need to be committed to the initial higher premium because it will take time for that cost of that vaccine to be lowered. So I think in addition to that, you then have to look at the global procurement mechanisms that are purchasing large amounts of doses. So for example, Gavi is supplying a large proportion of the vaccines from Africa. If you have vaccine manufacturers coming on board, are they pre-agreed arrangements that will secure some of those doses being manufactured, being purchased, from the African manufacturers? So I think these are all subject areas or topics that are very much being focused on. At a continental level, I think you're well aware of the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, and this is referenced in the report by the team. And I think these continental coordination and initiatives like this are what will be able to harmonize these efforts and actually establish a sustainable and economical way for allowing new manufacturers to enter the vaccine market, but again, not to sort of have a very short lifespan because of all the challenges that I've just mentioned. So I'll stop there, Gavin.
Thanks, Shingai. Mimi, I'm going to pose this question to you. You are certainly one of the best respected and most dynamic regulators in the world. And actually last night I read your bio in great depth, and you're quite inspirational, I have to say. You are a force. There is a question about the relationship between regulatory reliance and colonization. In other words, how do we balance regulatory reliance and promoting decolonization practices in global health? It's a tough one. Thoughts, Mimi?
Thank you very much. It really is a tough one, but maybe I should start by probably defining what reliance is, and to say that reliance is not the loss of sovereignty for any country that does reliance. So reliance is to ensure that you use your resources better. Somebody has done an evaluation, you look at it, you decide whether you are happy with it. If you are not, you ask more questions. So reliance is not full recognition. Reliance is doing, I'm not repeating what has been done, but looking at what somebody else has done and then taking a decision or asking more questions. So there is nothing like colonization in reliance. And just to actually say what we've been trying to do, you know, in Africa, we have five ML3, maturity level 3 countries. And we have actually taken the decision that amongst ourselves in Africa, we will start to rely on each other. So reliance does not necessarily mean you're relying on a country that is better resourced, but it has to do with your capacity. So if Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa decided that we're all ML3, and therefore if one country has done a review, the other country will look at it and then ask any other questions that they think they have not done. That is reliance. So reliance can be done in many ways, but it is not the loss of sovereignty. That is what we need to understand. It is just using your resources better if you are not as strong as a regulator. And in that process, you actually also build capacity. So very soon, other countries would be relying on you. So it strengthens regulatory systems. It allows us to look to using our resources in places like safety and quality surveillance post getting an approval or post doing reliance. Use your resources better. And it's not just for countries like us. Every country can do reliance. I've had a chance where the UK MHRA actually relied on our vaccination reports for a product that we had introduced in Ghana, and it was now going to be introduced in the UK. And the MHRA asked us for our safety data. That is reliance. So they use that safety data to be able to start their safety monitoring and to take certain decisions from it. So reliance and colonization, I would not say go at all together. It is not the loss of sovereignty. It is the ability to use your resources more effectively, look at data from another jurisdiction and see, or another, evaluation and see whether it suits you, and then ask the necessary questions. So that is my answer for this particular question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mimi. We've got 5 minutes left. One point to make. I didn't realize that Dr. Kathy Newsell has already started. So Dr. Newsell is the Fogarty director and Peter Kilmark's deputy director again. There is a question that came very early on that I said I would get to, and that is, I'm going to open it up to all panelists. Can we comment on the requirements for harmonizing and strengthening ethical health data governance to support AI use? Harmonizing and strengthening ethical health data governance to support AI use. Anyone from the panel who'd like to answer that one live?
Maybe I can give it a go. I
Sure.
don't have an answer directly, but I think a lot of concerns are there about AI and its applications in research and development. And I think it's an amazing tool. And as Mimi said, it's not going away. And so what we need to do is to embrace that this is a new approach and really think about how do we integrate these new innovations in our systems. And, in addition to that, for example, making sure that regulators are kept up to date with any progress that's happening within the research field. But also, if you think back to the R&D ecosystem that we were talking about, a major component with AI governance, etc., would be to make sure that Africa and countries who are in the global south, who may not be at the forefront of AI in drug discovery or R&D, are not left behind, and we recreate the same gap that exists currently with the R&D for the traditional methods that we followed. So how do we make sure that we keep in mind that we need to carry each other along and work together from the beginning, so that as we progress, we're actually all progressing together. So not an answer, but just a point to consider regarding AI and ethics and governance. Thanks.
Fantastic. We've got 3 minutes left and 2 unanswered questions. And actually, I think they're kind of related. Sheila Umburu asks, there's lack of trust in the regulatory system. What's driving that mistrust? And how could you improve the regulatory pathway to help resolve that problem? And then the other one is, what is the ideal approach to regulatory harmonization across Africa? So there's sort of 2 related questions. Mimi, I'm going to put you on the spot, and then Shingai, if you wanted to comment as well. We've got 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think probably the lack of trust is actually diminishing as we've gone on. It was probably because we were all using different guidelines, different standards, different tools. But since we actually started working closer together, since we started developing common tools, in the Africa Vaccines Regulatory Forum, we have tools for evaluating clinical trials. We have a common guideline. We have a common guideline for doing GCP inspections. We have a guideline for looking at every part of a clinical trial application. Now, in doing so, the decisions that are made from one country to the other do not differ. And therefore, the trust is built. We work together, I mean, once you're all looking into and asking the same questions, it is very unlikely that one does not trust the other. And information sharing was key. So if one regulator sees something and is able on a certain platform to be able to share the information with another regulator, then trust is built. During COVID, we had this new AU, Africa Union Smart Safety Surveillance, and we all had our data in one database, safety database. So we could see what everyone else was doing. As Shingai says, I think that the best investment in research is to strengthen the regulator, because then you know you have credible data, you know you have a well overseen trial, a well monitored trial, and there's no difference between what is happening in one place and what is happening in another. It also serves to build capacity. We are not all at the same level of capacity, but at some point we will get there, and you know, and in different ways. But in working together, in strengthening our capacity together, in learning to rely on each other, I think the level of trust that is built then increases, and you know, we do get there. I'm not sure what the second question was, because I've lost.
I think you've answered both together, which is perfect.
Excellent.
We are at
Excellent.
time, exactly at time, which leads me to say just two things. First of all, here's the URL for the papers and the QR codes. I just checked them and they work amazingly. So if you put your iPhone or whatever phone you have up to those QR codes, you should get straight to the two papers. And then the last thing really is to thank Mimi Darko, Shingai Machingaidze, Sondo Abwoji, and Marco Schapperhoff. And thank you. We had 100 participants from every single continent, I checked, except Antarctica. But we did pretty well otherwise in terms of having a wonderful global audience. Thank you so much for your time and your brilliant questions. We will post the video of this, the recording of this online, as well as with the papers and the slides. Thanks so much, and thanks for the very kind words I see from Peter, and thanks to the panelists from Emily, and agree with the last word about investing to strengthen regulatory systems. Yes, excellent point to end on. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.